Welcome to the Dynasty Dummies podcast. I am Zach Reed, back again with JMic at JMic Check. And Scott Fishbowl week. We're gonna eschew the fishbowl. I don't wanna put anybody out, but you also should be following the fishbowl. It's so much fun. There's so much going on. Josh ADHD has his tool up. You can track the earliest drafted, the latest drafted. You can see people pulling their hair out. You can see live drafts happening. Did you see the Seattle live draft, JMic? That looked unbelievable.
I might have saw a tweet or two about it, but I can't. It's not coming to mind. What was going on there?
They had the hallway with like projections, so it looks like you're walking through a fish tank when you get to the SFB, and then they had the big portrait of Scott Fish up on the wall, and oh man, it just like spare no expense. I've been so excited, so happy with all of the positivity, all of the turnout. We just did the Scott Fishbowl Podathon with Sal Lido, and he crushed it, and everybody who came in and helped, and everybody who guested, and raised a ton of money, which is really what it's all about. I mean, fantasy football is great, but the charity part of the Scott Fishbowl is what pops for me. But I don't want to take up everything with the Scott Fishbowl. We're rolling back into Dynasty season. The Scott Fishbowl to me kind of kicks off startup season, and so I think that's where I'd like to kind of take this tonight. Although let's not get stuck in any one direction.
I'm with it, man. And listen, as simply to be in the presence of one of the greatest Scott Fishbowl players, points over expected. Shout out to good old Ken Wyrock. Listen, I'm just happy to be able to ride your coattail into the greatness that we're about to go into. So before we dive too deep in any specific direction, just like you said, Zach, welcome everyone. We're happy to be with you all again. And I'm excited as we continue to inch closer and closer to August, inch closer and closer to training camps and startup season and all these best ball things. And people are really excited, and the buzz is in the air for the 2022 football season, which means that fantasy players are rejoicing everywhere. So as we get into all the things that we may talk about this evening, Zach, where's the first place that you like to stop when we're looking at your musings, the things that have really had your mind twisted in a pretzel of late?
So I listen to a lot of audiobooks at work, and I started one today and ended it today. I didn't get all the way through it. I got one sentence into this audiobook, and the description was something to the effect of, it fell to the floor with a marimba-like clatter. And I was just like, no, I'm done. I shut it off. If something is good, if there's a payoff, yeah, look, I'll put up with some fluff and I'll go along with it. But by and large, keep it simple. And I think that applies to not just writing, but everything we do in life, whether you're listening right now to coaching narratives and you're trying to make those fit what you want to happen, convincing yourself that somebody is going to come in and be that guy, even though it hasn't happened. I think right now the Elijah Mitchell, like everybody, like Elijah Mitchell has fallen way down. He's going at running back 25. Nobody expected him to be the guy last year, and I think people are trying to convince themselves that he's not this year. It doesn't have to be that hard. You don't have to convince yourself. You saw him do it. Chances are he's going to do it again. I don't care that San Francisco drafted somebody. If you've seen success, believe that success. And I think we fall into, especially in fantasy football, that paralysis by analysis, for lack of a better term, where we overthink things, we overcomplicate things, we overdo things. I was on the Dynasty grind last night with Peter Howard, and I won't shout to put the name of this person on blast, because I love everybody who shows up in the chat and asks us questions, but there was a trade question on Dynasty Grind last night. And the trade question was, should I trade Russell Wilson, Daniel Jones, Devontae Adams, 23 third, a 23 fifth, a 24 third, a 24 fifth for Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, a 23 third first, a 23 second, a 24 first, and a 24 second. And I was like, look, if that came into my inbox, that's an automatic decline because I don't even want to think about it. I don't even want to parse that out. But if you start breaking that down and you say, okay, I can take Russell Wilson out of that, and I can take Zach Wilson out of that, and I could take the picks out of that and just start looking at, okay, what do I want to accomplish? What's the crux of what I want? Keep it simple. I think you're going to be so much better off.
That takes my brain to an interesting place, Zach, and I'm curious of your thoughts in this idea of keeping it simple. In psychology, that there's a term called the endowment effect, and I know that you know what that means, but just for our listeners or anyone that may not understand or may not have heard that before, the endowment effect is essentially the idea or the circumstance where someone believes that something that they own has a higher value than essentially if they didn't own it. So, for example, we see this, I think, happen, and I know that I've fallen victim to it with myself. We see this when we try to offer trades. Right. So if Cortland Sutton is on my team, I may be trying to actually move Cortland Sutton for a 23 first plus. Actually, I want a 23 and a 24 plus. He got Russell Wilson now. Like Cortland Sutton's about to ball out and go crazy. But if Cortland Sutton is not on my team and I'd like to trade for him, in some respects, I'm like, he's probably not worth 2 firsts. Like, I mean, I'd think about a 24 first, maybe a little more, but you're definitely not getting a 23 first for Cortland Sutton. So, I bring all that. I hope to bring that full circle in your thought. And I don't like asking closed-ended questions, but I'm going to in this instance. Does that also take effect when it comes to our thoughts? When it comes to keeping it simple, right? Because I think that when you say keep it simple, I think that people's brains go directly to, okay, if I'm keeping it simple, then it's about what I have in between my ears and what I'm holding on to in terms of things that I know and can hold dear. And they're going to place a pretty heavy value on that. When I know a lot of what we discuss week over week is that we don't know and that we're consistently looking to learn and grow. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, so I think keeping it simple doesn't necessarily mean closing yourself off. And so don't fall into the trap of simplifying things so much that you don't learn anything, you don't grow, but also look for, it's Occam's razor, look for the simple explanation to things. That was the impetus behind you and Peter have kind of denoted it the Zach Reed rule, but the 20 receptions in college is what I'm looking for. Like, it's not a hard and fast line. But it gives me something to look at. And the more I dig into it, the more it looks like the NFL is not particularly creative. So it's a simple way for me to say, hey, did this guy catch 20 balls in college? Nope. Okay, he's probably not a pass catcher, so I'm going to bump him down. He may come back in on my radar. Oh, it's Kenneth Walker this year. Is a really good running back. He's my running back 2. But my initial evaluation looking at his statistics, it's like, yeah, he's probably not got the top 5 running back in his range of outcomes. Like, he would literally have to be Derrick Henry to get there. Chances are he's not Derrick Henry. I've seen one Derrick Henry in my lifetime. He's pretty impressive. Still kicking, by the way, as a 28-year-old. But it's that look for things, look to continue to grow, but don't overcomplicate everything. I think you see that a ton now with analysis, because everybody's trying to carve out their niche, and everybody's trying to find the next new thing, and everybody is, you've got all of these acronyms. You've got CPOE now, and you have any yards, and you've got air yards, and you got all of these things. You need to figure out and parse simply what matters, because throwing stuff at the wall doesn't always make it right, and piling more and more and more onto something doesn't necessarily make it right. It ends up being really noisy, kind of like what we talked about with Leo last week. It's don't shut yourself off, but also, man, like, try not to overthink it.
That, I believe, and as you mentioned, something that we discussed quite in depth with Leo, that's probably one of the hardest things for people to do in this space, because what I'm finding year over year is people really enjoy telling you their opinion. And it's great. I'm glad people are excited. I'm glad people feel strongly about various things in this space. The flip side of that is that fantasy isn't really a place that he who screams loudest is rightest per se, right? So this place where the humility sets in, the learning sets in, and when you mention keep it simple, I just hope that people are able to grasp that keeping it simple is a lot about trying to boil down the information that you have and figuring out what it looks like to be able to lay it out plainly and not make things more complicated than they have to be, which I think is a really simple thing to say, but a really difficult thing to do.
It's funny. I saw Elliot Chris tweet out either yesterday or the day before a question to his audience, and said, "What would be your piece of advice to fantasy analysts or fantasy players?" And I saw Pat Thorman, who is fantastic. He's a really, really brilliant analyst, not just because he's from New England, but he said, understand that you can be wrong. And we talk about this all the time, but I firmly believe that's one of the things. And the other part of that is understand other people can be wrong. The endowment effect doesn't just pertain to, if I buy a sandwich and then you ask me for the sandwich, I'm going to sell it to you for more than what I paid for. It's not just that, but it's ideas. Like you have your own ideas, and you tend to stick with your ideas as valuable rather than somebody else's. And I think you got to be really careful with that. You also have to be really careful of spectacular findings. It's somebody who is telling you, this is exactly how, fantasy football is going to play out. This is the metric that is going to get you to where you're going to go. If it's too good to be true, it absolutely is.
So I think that leads pretty well into this idea. We talk about startups, and we're talking about obviously ADP, right? The average draft position. When people are talking about spectacular findings, how many times over and over do we hear people talk about this guy's a steal in the 12th, or this, who could reach for this person in the third? Like, what are we doing? So I think that's a really nice place to be able to input and talk through a little bit of ADP. And when we're looking at these startups, when we're looking at these drafts that we're in, to try to be able to leverage, again, all the information that we've taken in over the entire course of the non-point scoring season. And now what all of the training camp buzz may be about here shortly, as well as what we're hearing from coaching staffs in these rumbles and percolating prior to this time. I'm wondering where do you stand when it comes to ADP and how we're able to, in some degree, avoid the noise, but also the spectacular finding of this guy being a steal or this guy not being what we thought he would be in this early part of our drafts.
So I love looking at ADP, whether I am in a startup or whether I'm just in a league that's existing, because I think it gives you a really good feel for the the community, that capital C community, what everybody is thinking. Doesn't necessarily tell you what your league is thinking. That's the average part of it. Not every league is going to draft strictly to ADP, but I love to look at, and don't tell anybody, but I like to look at redraft ADP as well, because I think sometimes Dynasty undervalues current season production. And we've talked about that, where I think that there are three distinct avenues of value, where you have the dreaming, like the rookie dreaming value, you have potential value to increase, and then you also have points, and points are actually valuable. And so there are three distinct types of value, and they are more and less valuable depending on the time in the cycle you are in fantasy football. And so that's like I'll look at redraft ADP, I look at obviously DLF ADP, and that's kind of where I looked for what we're going to talk a little bit on tonight. And I think you can use those.
So, and I think that brings us around to the various ADPs. We're looking at redraft, or we may be looking at our best ball, right? A lot of folks have been in these best ball streets pretty hot and heavy of late, whether whatever the platform may be. And taking the information that you're getting in Dynasty, what do you find useful to be able to glean from when you leverage your ADP work and the conversations that you've been having of late as well with a lot of smart folks?
So it's interesting to me to see when there's a really big gap in ADP. So, for example, right now, Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis in best ball is going anywhere from wide receiver 24 all the way up to wide receiver 19. That, again, it's a lot of really smart people, but there's a pretty big cacophony there. There's a lot of groupthink. There's a lot of I'll say Gabe Davis is great, and then somebody parrots it back, and you're getting that, the entire community is feeling the Gabe Davis, where it looks like Dynasty is a little more skeptical. Gabe Davis in DLF's latest ADP in June, it was wide receiver 40. So there's some meat on the bone, as it were, for acquiring Gabe Davis in Dynasty, whereas in redraft and season long, all of a sudden he's being pushed up like he will be a top 24 plus wide receiver. And I think that if you look at, he's got to go an awful long way to get to to be a wide receiver too.
There's always this large morass of receivers year in, year out, it seems, where we often think that like 50 guys are going to be wide receiver twos. It's going to be 50 players for 50 guys who are wide receiver twos. And every year we end up disappointed, even though the landscape looks really pretty. This is really nice. This is almost like for those Marvel fans or folks who are heavy in MCU right now, this is almost like WandaVision, where you see the plot of land and that, we got all these hopes and dreams, all this wide open space where we're going to build our home, and it's going to be lovely and it's great. And you blink and all of a sudden you are in this really scary hex. And I didn't understand that what I thought this was. This is not actually it. I am in someone else's nightmare right now. This is scary. That feels like the wide receiver landscape.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like I just did a show on Dynasty Crossroads with Peter Howard and Jacob Rickroad, and I'm going to stand on the shoulders of giants for a second, because it's what I do. If somebody else is a lot smarter than I am, I'll listen to him. And Jacob has done a lot of work with wide receivers and specifically what it takes to be a wide receiver too, in the top 24. And I just went back and double checked. Not that I don't believe Jacob, but I wanted to make my own spreadsheet.
Just add him, Zach. Just add him next time. If that's how you feel, just add him.
At Clutch Fantasy. Does it work on YouTube if I just shout him out?
Yes. Apparently, yes.
But he says, and he's absolutely right, that there are almost to a season 4 teams that have 2 top 24 wide receivers. And if you do some quick math on that, I'll scratch it out on my hand. If there are 4 teams that have 2 top 24 wide receivers, that means that there are 12 teams every year that don't have a top 24 wide receiver. And it's interesting. I kind of did an exercise while I was looking at this to try to figure out the teams that I thought would have 2. And the biggest red beacon that I can see is Denver. Russell Wilson has supported in Seattle 3 different times 2 top 24 wide receivers. He's now got 2 receivers who are going outside the top 30. I think Jared Judy's going 30 and Cortland Sutton is going 31 or 32 in DLF's ADP. Sutton, who played with Joe Flacco for the first 8 games of 2019, the only competent quarterback that Sutton has had. Like, and we can't argue that. Like, that is just straight fact. I'm gonna endowment effect. I'm gonna entrenchment effect. All the effects, the cause and effect. Drew Lock is not very good. Sutton wasn't very good with Lock. Sutton averaged 79.5 yards a game in 8 games with Flacco in 2019. And you can't small sample size and you can't prorate that out.
I was about to say, Peter somewhere is hearing this.
If you do that, that looks amazing. Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton are my bets to be one of those sets of top 24 wide receivers. And I think Sutton is probably a top 12.
So in making that bet in tandem, and I guess you're making simultaneous bets, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about those 2 being the duo to lean into, but that's also saying that there are stayaways in terms of the early round selections for those. So being able to parse that out and understanding that we don't have the answers as to what that's going to look like, what matters to you. And I know that this is fresh information. This is fresh research that you've done. And obviously the part 1 I've listened to of that with you, Peter, and Jacob. And I think that was good stuff. And I'm excited to listen to part 2. And I think you all get into a lot more of that in part 2. With that said, as all of this is coming alive to you, you're doing your own work and finding it. What does it look like now? Obviously, if you're making the bet on Sutton and Jeudy in that respect, and we're trusting Russell Wilson, that's another bet that we're making. What now, or how do you go about trying to determine how I get away from the pairs or not getting caught in the traps of, hey, this guy is a wide receiver 1 for his team, but he's actually like a borderline wide receiver 3-4 in the league in terms of fantasy?
Well, I think some of them are pretty obvious because I think Jacksonville has been kind of a wasteland for a while, and there's nobody that's really excited. I'm sorry, JMic. I know, Duval. I know. I apologize, but and the same thing with like the Giants. The Giants haven't had a top 24 wide receiver since Odell was there, and Jacob Rickroad brought up that Kenny Golladay was great in his first couple of years in Detroit, which is where I think the quarterback matters, because Kenny Golladay was great tied to Stafford. Now you've seen Stafford go be like he is a kingmaker. You know, and yes, he was tied to Calvin Johnson, but then you saw him do the same thing with Marvin Jones and Golden Tate, and then he's just everywhere he's been. And so that to me, like, I'm still looking at the positives of this. Like, there are definitely stayaways. The Giants are a stay away. I think New England is a stay away in terms of a wide receiver, you know, top 24 wide receiver. Like, it's really hard for me to see. And we love Mac Jones. Like, that's fine. He's great. He's a game manager. He's very accurate. He's a Scott Fishbowl darling, because that's 66% completion percentage. He's going to be over that, so he's going to be in positive game scripts. I think he ended up last year as like the quarterback 17 or 18 in Scott's quarterback premium format, whereas in a regular, I say regular, like a standard quarterback scoring, he was like quarterback 24 or 5. So it's, you know, completion percentage is nice with him, but if you're looking for sneaky top 24 wide receivers, a lot of people are talking about New England. I've had a lot of people ask me about New England. I don't think New England is the place where you go look for sneaky top 24 wide receivers. I think Detroit is actually a great place to go look for sneaky top 24 wide receivers. Jared Goff has supported 2 top 24 wide receivers a couple times in his short, not that distinguished career. I mean, everybody loves to hate on Goff, but man, he does some of the things that are great for fantasy, which is get the ball out quick, get the ball out short, have a lot of possessions, and get the ball up and down the field. He's also blessed with a pretty mediocre defense in Detroit, so they're going to score. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown at wide receiver 37 is an interesting bet. So he's fluctuated. He's done the ride the waves. He's trothed and then he's crested and he's trothed again. When he came out, everybody was off him. He was not a sexy pick in rookie drafts.
Right.
The second half of the year, everybody was Amon-Ra St. Brown's a wide receiver 1. You know, you could get a first for him if you traded him. And then everybody kind of cooled off again because they realized Hawkinson's coming back. They realized Swift is coming back. Jamison Williams got drafted. DJ Chark is there. I still think that he drives enough volume to be really interesting, especially tied to a quarterback who has a history of sustaining top 24 wide receivers. So to me, it's about looking for those sneaky plays, those paths to success. Hunter Renfrow again is being undervalued. He's going wide receiver 52. Like, you could probably get him for a 22 second right now. And I think that there's a chance that he's still a top 24 wide receiver. He's not going to be a top 10 again. Devontae Adams is going to lead their team, but that's a sneaky place that could sustain 2 top 24 wide receivers.
Before I pivot away, I know you and I were talking pre-record button regarding the teams that would have the approximate 4 teams that would have 2 guys.
Yep.
And Las Vegas is one I didn't even think to consider in reference to that, but that's interesting.
And Carr did it when he had Crabtree and Cooper.
Yep.
So 2016, Crabtree, Cooper, 2 top 12. Actually, they were 12 and 13. So he has precedence. The offense that they are going to shift to has precedence. That was somebody asked that last night. What do you think the breakdown of the Raiders is going to look like? And I said, well, you've got that with the Patriots, where Welker had 170 targets, Gronk had 127 targets, and I can't even remember who the third one was. Oh, it was Aaron Hernandez had 121 targets or 119. Like, there is a real valid chance that there are 315 plus target receivers Waller's a tight end, but 3 players that see over 115 targets on the Raiders this year. Well, that's a pretty good start to sustaining 2 top 24.
I want to take a step back a moment and go back to Jared Goff. And I want this to be more about the type or the area and this concept that you're talking through. And I don't want this to be so much about Jared Goff. So it'll be interesting how we try to navigate this. But you talk about how Jared Goff has done it on multiple occasions, supporting 2 wide receivers to be top 24. Jared Goff now coming into year 2 in Detroit. And in 2021, when everything fell apart for that offense and the team wasn't good, and the coach was going crazy over wins in the locker room, and we saw every speech and every hype thing, Jared Goff was not exactly lighting it up in the fantasy space. Jared Goff on the season, total points, QB 24. Yep. Again, QB 24. And so if you look back last season, that's putting him behind the likes of Taylor Heineke, behind the likes of Matt Ryan and the extra sad offensive line in Atlanta, behind Ben Roethlisberger, behind the highly disrespected Teddy Two Gloves, and also behind Trevor Lawrence. And that puts him just ahead of last season Tua, Baker Mayfield, Daniel Jones, and even Sam Darnold. So I guess my thought is, and again, this is a half-baked thought as we've talked through this, Jared Goff, not someone that people are super excited about, even though the potential is there for good things to happen. And we've seen him do those things, even if we or many felt as though the coach in LA, the Rams, I can't think of his name, McVay was pulling the strings, right? But Jared Goff, surrounded by a lot of talent, DJ Chark coming back from injury, Jamison Williams coming back from injury, DeAndre Swift coming back from injury, TJ Hawkinson coming back from injury, last man standing, Amon-Ra St. Brown. But that's a nice bunch of players, and I'd say that some might even look and say, okay, that's a top half of the league supporting cast or skill position players. So when we look at that kind of a situation with a quarterback who's, I think, chiefly underachieved from a fantasy standpoint for his standards or for what we want for the quarterback position, but is surrounded by so much in the way of fireworks, or at least players who can pop off at times, what is the process to understand or to really grasp what these kinds of players can bring to our team, and why we're not more excited to bring them on in Dynasty or in redraft? Because I think there's something to be said for even a player that we've disposed of in Jared Goff, probably hasn't been chosen in a lot of Scott Fish Bowls to this point. But again, there's a lot of exciting things around him.
Yeah, and I don't think Jared Goff is a great quarterback. And I will fully cop that. Like, I have been on the bash Goff bandwagon for years, but he also has a quarterback 7 season under his belt. The way Detroit has put pieces around him is now similar to the weapons that he had in LA, where he can game manage. And I use that term not as necessarily a negative. I think a lot of people say game manage, and that's a negative. To me, if you can get the ball where it needs to be and not turn the ball over, not try to play hero ball, that can be very successful for fantasy. So, yeah, I think identifying teams that could have those 2 top 24 wide receivers also helps you identify potential quarterbacks that are being undervalued. I mean, it's the Kirk Cousins, perennially undervalued, but also has had 1, 2, 3 seasons where he supported top 24. 2 of those were 2 top 10. And since 2017, every single season he has had at least 1 top 24 wide receiver. Like, and it doesn't mean that Kirk Cousins is going to be a sexy quarterback pick. It doesn't mean that he's going to be a top 5 quarterback in scoring, but it also means that as a QB2 in Superflex leagues, man, that's not a bad guy to have. And even if you're playing in one quarterback, if you get him late and you can really stack up the rest of your roster, I don't mind playing the late round quarterback game with some of those guys.
Thought of another duo that might break in there. And a lot of what you talk about with Jared Goff, I feel like people maybe don't see him in this light yet, but many are not on the train, and that's what's happening in Miami.
Yeah.
For Tua Tagovailoa, right?
Yeah.
They go and get Tyreek Hill, perennial wide receiver 1, and then Jalen Waddle, who kicks the door down in his rookie season. I think he was top 24 last year as well.
Yep.
Obviously, now they're not on the same team. I get it, but pinpointing and again, when we talked about placing those bets, keeping it simple. If I understand that I think that good things can happen in this offense, it almost starts to begin to, even as you're looking at ADP, it allows you to have a simplified way of how you rearrange the names without even having to plot them in a spreadsheet or anything else, because you know that certain pockets, I'm in this pocket with these guys, and when this falls apart, I'm moving on to a different position, or I'm skipping down, or able to rearrange.
Yeah, and I even will simplify when I start looking at ADP. I even go simpler than this, because again, I piggybacked on Jacob Rickroad for most of this with the two top 24 wide receivers. When I start looking at ADP, I just go down to about pick 50, and I start looking for guys that interest me. I start looking for guys that I think have meat on the bone. I start seeing Marquise Brown, who is wide receiver 26 right now, is in Arizona. You don't have DeAndre Hopkins for the first 6 games there. It's a huge passing attack. You saw him be a top 24 wide receiver last year in Baltimore. Like, I think he's a value. You've got the Sutton and Judy that we already talked about. You've got Juju. And you talk about an endowment effect player, man. People that have Juju, they don't want to give him up. They don't, because they spent so much to get him when they did. Because you either drafted him as a rookie and like traded him because you weren't sure and you could get a pretty good haul, or you drafted him after that second year and you paid a bunch. I mean, he was going in the top 10, and you look at what he's done. He was wide receiver, it was like 18 or 19 in 2020. Nobody even remembers that. It's been such a long time. We've forgotten. Yeah. But he is right now in DLF's latest ADP, wide receiver 34. Okay, so he's going back in that range of players that I think are values. And that's a place where he could come in. He doesn't have to be the one. I think Juju is that type of player that I look at that you really want him to be the second option on that team. Well, Travis Kelce is going to be the one. Travis Kelce is the one. He's been even when Tyreek Hill was there, Travis Kelce was the one. Mm-hmm. And so I think Travis Kelce running that seam route, Juju Smith-Schuster doing what he does underneath, driving a lot of targets. There is an awful lot to be excited about. But the cool thing is with the Chiefs, you don't even have to make a bet. You can get Juju, who's wide receiver 34. You can get Sky Moore, who's wide receiver 36. Mm. And it's going to, like, one of those guys is going to shake out.
The piece of finding someone that is going to outkick their ADP is a fun endeavor, and one that I think that we miss on consistently year over year as a community, just in the fantasy space. Obviously, some may have more success than others, but that process of making your bet, and understanding that when you make a bet, you are simultaneously making at minimum two other bets. I think one in reference to the quarterback and another in reference to other teams, right? And there's probably a term for it. But I keep thinking about it as you walk through this and as we discuss and break it down even further. The idea of not self-sabotaging in your drafts is crucial, and understanding that you don't want to be making certain bets where earlier in the draft you bet against it and then later you're betting for it, because I think that maybe can pull down the ceiling of what your team can look like. But what are your thoughts there in reference to simultaneously making those bets throughout a draft?
Yeah, I don't. I think you're right. I think you want the highest ceiling, especially once you get into a season. That's how you win. You don't win playing safe. I know you hear a lot of people that like to mitigate and they like to get the floor, and the longer I play, the more I realize that the floor doesn't get you where you need to be. It doesn't get you where you want to be. It gets you that 6th round pick and enjoy whoever you got in your rookie draft at 106, and enjoy that Chris Olave and try to rebuild that way. Like I think you want to make the bets that have that high ceiling. I think you want to go again. We talked about Sutton. Sutton has top 12 upside this year, and is going at wide receiver 36 or 31. Like those are the bets that I'm gonna go after. Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I'll tell you something. I'm cheating because talk about getting simple. These are guys you've seen do it already, even though they're young, even though they're way down ADP. These are players that you've seen do it. You've seen Marquise Brown do it. You've seen Sutton do it. You've seen Juju do it. You've seen Amon-Ra St. Brown do it. You've seen Hunter Renfrow do it. That's cheating. It's cheating. It's so simple. You look for the guys who are being undervalued, who you already know are good players.
We're out here trying to help everyone be better students here, better test takers, and I love that. I love that, and I'm really curious as we continue forward, and whether it be Scott Fish Bowl redrafts, whatever it may be. I think this concept very much ties into a lot of the discussion that we had again with Leo. I referenced that as our last time together, in understanding your identity as who you are as a fantasy football player, and understanding that your strategy needs to be something that you have a great grasp of. So even if you need to make a couple of bullet points just to remind yourself of what that looks like for you and how you want to navigate specific spaces, I think this conversation ties perfectly in with that, to understand that when you make certain bets, you don't want to be cutting yourself off at the knees to try to be able to make sure that you're reaching the heights that you want to get to. And that self-sabotaging is something that we really need to be mindful of as we navigate.
Yeah, and map it out. It's just exactly what you said. Write it down, do bullet points, whatever. Leo just dropped 2 in the last 2 weeks Eisenhower matrix articles, where the first one kind of gave you a high level view. The one that he just released like 2 days ago is really specific to how he actually attacks a draft. If you subscribe to DLF, absolutely go look at that. If you don't subscribe to DLF, go like nudge Leo and have him give you a tutorial, because I bet he will do that. Like he's really accessible and great, and it's worth understanding how valuable it is to have your plan on paper, because it's once it's down there, then you can refer back to it. You're not going off the cuff. You're not, and if you're changing things, you have to, it's got to be a conscious decision to change things, because you have this concrete plan So to change it, you actually have to go in, make a decision. Okay, I'm going to change this. What's my reasoning? Whereas if you're on the fly, I think sometimes you get caught in just, gut reaction and doing it. And maybe that's okay, but I don't want to make any decisions without thinking about them beforehand.
Think before you speak. Come on. Listen, we're out here trying to get better every day, people. Every day is a good day to grow. Remember that. Every day is a good day to grow. And obviously here at the Dynasty Dummies, we're continuing to try to be better with what we're researching in terms of our conversations, better with what we're doing in reference to hanging around smart people and trying to do our best to glean all that we can to help our processes be cleaner as we navigate through the season. And hopefully, as you all are on the journey with us, that we can all learn from each other and get better together, because I think that there's a lot of space to be mined, if you will, a lot of wonderful gems that we can unearth. So I'm excited as we continue this train. Zac, what a wonderful evening. Is there any other points or anything else that's churning before we get ready to cut the lights out?
I do. I know you're right at the end of it, but the way I attack wide receiver is looking for those young ascending receivers. Running back is absolutely different. It's absolutely backwards, because the community dictates. The community likes the young running backs. The community likes the Devontae Adams, the high scoring wide receivers. So you're looking for receivers on the come up. You're looking for running backs that are still scoring. You want those points, man. You want the Derrick Henrys. You want the Aaron Jones. Running back 17 the last 4 years has been running back 24, running back 2, running back 5, and running back 9. Aaron Jones, man. Ezekiel Elliott scoring running back 22. Elijah Mitchell, we talked about. It's just a different animal when you're attacking running back. Go look for the guys who are going to score your points. Those are the players that you attack when you have an established team, a competitive team, a team ready to go. If you're not that, you're looking for the young, quasi-established wide receivers to start building that roster.
That's the heat right there, y'all. That's the heat right there. We could keep going for a long time talking about roster construction and that piece right there that you just gave. Oh man, incorporating that into our plans, into how we go about structuring, understanding the cost of what it takes to get those things, and being okay with letting the chips fall where they may. When you make that bet, I feel like we have another episode on our hands coming up. That's gonna be good.
You know what the beautiful thing is? We got a whole season of episodes, and this is like it's so much fun, JMic, for me to record with you, both because you are just the consummate professional as a host. Like, you're fantastic. I don't even have to do anything. It's just shooting layups. Like, it's great. You're throwing me oops and I'm just putting it in. But also, and we talked about this before the show, for me, I like to be surrounded by really intelligent people. I never want to be the smartest person in the room. I don't. I want people who push me. I want people who drive me. And that is what you do. And I know you give it the shy and the I don't want this praise, but absolutely the questions that you ask and the directions that you take things. This is going to be a fun season. It's going to be so much fun to chop it up with you week in and week out. And I hope that our listeners are as excited about this as I am.
2022, y'all buckle in. We on over here at the Dynasty Dummies. Again, what a privilege it is for us to be able to do this. Thank you all for checking us out, for coming to kick it with us. Any support that you give in terms of a listen or a reference or anything, we appreciate it. We thank you so much for lending us this time. Obviously, I'm excited to be able to continue this journey, and we're going to have a lot of fun as we go. So, Zac, I'll kick it over to you to take us home.
Hey, we're at the DFPN at work here with the Dynasty Dummies, and we wouldn't have the Dynasty Dummies show if we didn't have the at work, the guys over there, Sal, Kevin, and Steve, Dynasty Outhouse, Russ Fisher, Joe, NFF Trader Joe, like at FF _Trader Joe. Let me get that handle right. The man behind so many of the beautiful SFB Abbeys, including JMics, that Roswell, that fish being abducted by, like, man, Joe does some fantastic work. And if you see anything that makes us over at the Dynasty Dummies, any of the handles over there look anywhere remotely funny, intelligent, whatever on Twitter, it's Joe's most likely behind it. He's the brains behind the operation. Matt at Fat Mormon, Kyle at Caleb Brack, obviously JMic, you at JMic Check, myself at Tacit Assassin 13. This has been a fun show. I appreciate you guys listening. I appreciate you riding along with us. We'll check you next week. This has been the Dynasty Dummies. Peace. And then there's a button over here that I got to